Hello, this is Words and Memes for Remote Teams. I'll be your host, Daniel Friedman from Remoter Consulting Group. In this video, we're going to define key terms related to remote teams and explain how they are related within the context of what we are calling the remote team mindset, as discussed in the previous section. The summary of this lecture is that we will discuss definitions and implications of key ideas and terms to make you a more effective communicator in your remote teams. There are a few goals for this section. First, our goal is to understand the hardware and software tools used in remote work. What are the categories of these tools? This will help us communicate clearly about future ideas, as well as help you recognize categories of overlap or of missing tools in your own workplace. We'll understand roles and rituals in the context of remote teams. What are roles and rituals in remote teams? Why are they important? And importantly, how are they different than they were in non-remote teams? Lastly, we'll talk about how a positive mindset for individuals can influence team performance. There will also be some downloadables with this course. However, they're not done yet at the time of this recording, so I can't tell you too much more. With that, I'm going to take myself off of webcam so you can just see the slides, but I'll continue talking. The first term we're going to talk about are tools. Tools are pieces of technology, whether digital or low-tech, so low-tech or high-tech, that assist work. Here are the three categories of tools that we'll talk about. First are the low-tech hardware tools. These include hammers and wrenches, as visualized here, but these are the physical objects that are non-digital. Second are high-tech hardware. This includes desktop computers, laptop computers, smartphones, tablets, all kinds of smart devices. We'll talk more about them in a subsequent slide. The third category of tool is software. Software are programs that run on high-tech hardware. It's important to distinguish hardware from software for digital devices because sometimes there are compatibilities or not. But importantly, by calling all of these things tools, we remember the important lesson, which is that all of them help us get work done. That helps us refocus on what we need to get done and whether we're using the best tool for the job, whether it's a low-tech hardware like a pen, a high-tech hardware like a computer, or a high-tech piece of software like an email client. First, let's talk about low-tech tools in the context of remote work. Hardware are the physical things that you use to get the job done. Let's think about the physical hardware at your desk. What tools are around you physically in your workspace? Well, you might have seating. There's various kinds of seating, ranging from traditional office chairs to sitting balls. There are desks, whether sitting desks or standing desks. And there's also all kinds of office supplies you might have around, ranging from paper, tape, pens and pencils, filing cabinets, hydration, sticky note, printers, and so on. Here, we're not going to go into too much detail about ergonomics because it's not our area of expertise. However, we've attached a downloadable with some good resources and YouTube channels for you to follow if you want more tips on ergonomics. We want to focus more on the high-tech and the digital end. Let's talk about the high-tech tools at your desk. Let's talk about the high-tech hardware. These are, again, the physical things that you're using to get the job done. It just, in this case, they happen to be digital. Here are the categories. We have a desktop computer, laptop computers, phones and tablets, and peripherals. Peripherals here can include printers, webcams, microphones, mouse and keyboard, external hard drives, and so on. Again, blurring into traditional office supplies, especially nowadays. We want to be really aware that some software will only run on desktop or only run on a computer or only on a phone. And for your remote work performance, a small laptop screen, keyboard, and mousepad are usually not optimal for performance in almost all cases. For example, you might not be able to get as much screen real estate to see all the chapters of your book that you're editing or different spreadsheets to cover different aspects of your research or business. And while there are plenty of resources online about being a digital nomad, for example, somebody who can very effectively, relative to their condition, work while traveling, we want to focus on optimal performance for work from home or other remote work settings for people who are professionally working in the location they're going to be professionally working in. In these cases, it is almost always beneficial to have external keyboards, mice, and monitors. So again, we ask, what tools are around you physically in your workstation, and what digital tools do you have in your workspace? Are they able to run the software and able to be accompanied by the physical tools that you need? The last category we'll talk about of tools are software. Software, are the digital tools that run on hardware. They also assist you in your work. They're not an enemy to battle. They're not a Rosetta Stone to understand. They're simply the things that you're going to be using to communicate and get the job done. Here, because there are so many kinds of platforms within each of these areas of tools, we're just going to discuss what the tools do and why you need them. For detailed comparisons of different kinds of tools, see sites such as StackShare, Alternative2.net, Capterra, G2, or Trustpilot. Or talk to people who are in your area and find out about best practices or about required software. Here we've provided the sheet categorized into 5 areas and left it for you to print and fill out or digitally fill out. The first category is email. The second is sharing files, such as cloud storages. The third is chat and messaging programs. The fourth are audio-visual meeting software. And the fifth are task-specific software, for example, related to image processing or scientific research. Where we left space for multiple in each of these areas, since almost always each individual and each team is using multiple within each. Now ask yourself, what are the risks or costs of having this many account or platforms, even if the costs are just cognitive? Are there any areas where you see a possible simplification? For example, could you redirect an old email account so you don't have to log in to check it? Or could you ask your one friend or collaborator on the one messaging platform if they could join you on another more common platform in order to simplify your tech use? Another question to ask yourself is, does your team have a best practice for each of these areas? Do people use the same platform to get their work done? And is this effective for the team or not? There are times where you can imagine it is effective. For example, if teammates vary in how well they program, they might very well use different methods to run code on their computers. However, there are other times when platform fragmentation can be extremely inconvenient, for example, in the case of shared file storage or messaging or meeting software. Notice how we haven't mentioned any specific platforms by name. It's because we don't want this video to be tied down in the current pros and cons of different platforms. We want to talk about the general aspects of software choice that transcend any specific opportunities today. Let's look at what the research says on software tool choice. We're going to be talking about this paper from 2017 in Journal of Computer Information Systems by Hassel and Lemian called Media Impacts and Performance in Dispersed Teams. And this is a really interesting study. They actually used an experimental protocol with about 50 real teams to test the team's ability to do information sharing in a task. So that's a transferable task that might have something to do with the skill or the efficiency of the team in working together in a normal context. They again performed this experiment with 50 real pre-existing teams of people who actually were working together already. The finding was that there was more variation in performance within a platform used than between the platforms that they used. The implication is, it's not what software you use, it's how you use it. In other words, there's no silver bullet software platform. Any software platform can be used effectively or ineffectively, simply whether or not people use it. One other interesting finding of this paper was that worker satisfaction was positively correlated with their participation on the platform, their extent of social interactions on the platform, and also the richness of the communication media. So the takeaways here would be everybody, if they're on a platform by choice or not, should try to make it as rich, as social, and as communicative as possible. And let me just read a little bit of details about the task, just for those who are skeptical that these kinds of games might transfer into the context of regular work. The authors wrote, "The task used in this study is an adaptation of the International Institute task developed by Hassel and Cotton. The task is a hidden profile task in which individual members of a team possess small amounts of common information and large amounts of private information related to the task. In order for the teams to make optimal choices, team members must effectively process and share the unique information that they each possess. Any one set of unique information is not enough on its own to solve the task, and teams have to communicate effectively to evaluate the information and alternatives and determine the optimal solution." End quote. That sounds a lot like modern remote teamwork to me. So that's really why we talked about this research paper, because it's such an interesting finding that has so many implications, and it's not bound up in any specific set of software tools available today. The implication: use rich media like images and video, be social, be engaged. The next thing we're going to talk about is mindset as a tool. Mindset is how you think and feel about a given situation, and it influences your actions. There's a few mindsets that we found helpful, and maybe you could keep them in mind for your remote team's context. A healthy mindset helps you be an effective teammate. If you're able to be supportive for a teammate when they need help, and you're able to see the positives of a situation when things are challenging and you're there working from home, you'll be more effective and you'll be a healthier teammate. A growth mindset will keep you improving your team. You'll keep looking for things where you could get better at as an individual in a team, and you'll feel honest and comfortable bringing them up in an atmosphere of improvement, not of critique. Expect openness and directness in communication. For asynchronous remote teams, there simply isn't enough bump into each other in the office time. All communication needs to be intentful, and you need to be aware that you're sending people often on multiple hours of work without being able to check back in them live. And so it's very important to communicate carefully. That doesn't mean you need to be by your phone 24/7. It just means that when you do communicate, it's better to be unambiguous. Related to this is that it's good to accept feedback regardless of the perceived ego cost or the official relationship between the teammates. An area of improvement, as mentioned earlier, will help your remote team stay effective, improving, and positive rather than brought down by interpersonal aspects of the team. Celebrate the power of proper distributed decision-making, or the wisdom of crowds. In other words, when the group makes a decision or a product that's better than any person could have made by themselves, celebrate that moment as proof that your team is working. And lastly, welcome emergent or upcoming best practices as they arise in your team or in your sector. For example, if a teammate derives a new combination of tools or a new shortcut, a new way of doing something, and it saves time for them, there should be an atmosphere of people feeling comfortable to bring that tool use up and potentially spread it to other teammates who might also find it effective. Additionally, look to people in adjacent sectors to you to see if there are any best practices that you could learn from them. I want to spend a few minutes describing this article from 2016 in Harvard Business Review by Martine Haas and Mark Mortensen called The Secrets of Great Teamwork. They wrote this article with some direct eyes on remote and distributed teams, although it's not exclusively about remote teams, but overall it's a really good read, and I think that there's some great points that they make. I just want to talk about the 4 things that they call enabling conditions, the 4 things that can allow for great teams to function, and then I want to talk about how each of them are important in the remote team's context. The first thing they mentioned is a compelling direction. Without an in-person shared experience, such as at the office, a remote team must have a clear and positive vision of what they are accomplishing on the short, medium, and long time frames. 2. Strong teams need strong structure. If point 1 was the why, strong structure is the how. Strong structure is especially important for remote teams where miscommunication or mission creep can cost days, if not weeks. Strong structure, again, doesn't mean around-the-clock availability. It means accountability, which is something we'll talk about in a later lesson, as well as transparency and clarity in what is being done. A third secret to great teams is supportive context, which is especially important now. And here I'd like to share a quote from their article. They wrote, "A team's members initially met over desktop video and gave one another virtual tours of their workspaces. By simply panning the camera around the room, they were able to show the remote colleagues their work environment, including things that were likely to distract or disrupt them, such as closely seated coworkers in an open planned space or a nearby photocopier. After the tours, the team members found they were better able to interpret and understand distant colleagues' attitudes and behaviors." End quote. That kind of humanization in the workspace is going to help empathize amongst employees so they'll be able to better delegate, which is also something we'll talk about later. The fourth thing that they talked about in this article is a shared mindset for teams. This is almost a summation or a restatement of all the other points. If your remote team has a shared mindset where everyone feels that the group is moving in a compelling direction with a strong structure and a supportive context, your team will be extremely effective and healthy. And here's one best practice that they mentioned that I thought was really nice. They wrote, "For ongoing monitoring, we recommend a simple and quick temperature check. Every few months, rate your team on each of the 4 enabling conditions and also on the 3 criteria of team effectiveness. Look in particular at the lowest scored condition and the lowest scored effectiveness criteria and consider how they're connected. The results will show you where your team is on track as well as where problems may be brewing." So maybe you could take this slide, and after the team has read the article, you could ask at the end of every week, where did we do really well on these 4 and where could we improve for next week? The next area we're going to talk about are roles in remote teams. So just a few points on roles here. Roles are functions that people perform on remote teams. Some roles may eventually become performed by computational entities, however. Roles designate ownership and accountability, and we'll have a whole section on accountability later in the course. Roles can be unofficial or official. So official titles would be an example of a role that's formally defined, probably on a yearly timescale, whereas unofficial or informal roles might be someone who's just having to be the note taker at a certain social gathering. Roles can exist at multiple levels, and there's different kinds of roles. These levels interact, and we're going to talk about that in the next section about totems. Interestingly, roles in remote teams include more people and new technologies than ever before. Let's think about just a few of the categories. First off, many people, more than ever, are working from home, and that will be discussed more in the remote teams mindset as well. Work from home people are taking place in remote teams that are located all around the world. That means asynchronous, but often 24/7 work. It means that all communication happens through the internet. And it means that sometimes new challenges of global law or of communication come into play. However, these people working from home or from offices around the world are not just linked up by the internet in a theoretical sense. Everybody is bound by the essential located workers now in all of these regions, which is why it is more important than ever that people also understand that remote teams and located teams work together. For example, in a hospital, they might send an image to be evaluated by another hospital, or an ambulance team might be relying on a remote dispatch team. In other words, remote workers are related to their essential located workers in the area. And lastly, more than ever, the remote teams include freelance and delivery members. Delivery being the in-person equivalent and freelance being the online equivalent. Freelance programs related to graphic design as well as task performance have exploded in recent years, and increasingly people rely on delivery services, or at least expect them, to get their basic needs met. This means that your remote team workers' efficiency is related to the delivery performance in their area, which again includes an increasingly large area. The next thing we'll talk about are rituals in remote teams. Rituals are behavioral sequences that reinforce effective behavior. We're going to talk about 3 kinds of rituals: sign on, sign off, and check-in. First, sign-in rituals. We'll talk about sign-in rituals that occur at 3 different timescales: daily, weekly, and yearly. A daily example of a sign-on ritual would be a pre-call equipment check. For example, 5 or 3 minutes before a video call begins, getting on a call with one of your colleagues just to make sure your audio and visuals work. A weekly sign-on ritual would be like a short Monday alignment meeting, just to make sure everybody was on the same page at the beginning of a week. An example of a sign-on ritual that might happen at a yearly timescale might be onboarding a new employee or setting new goals at the sign-on for a new year. Sign-off rituals also can take place at multiple timescales. A daily sign-off ritual would be an end-of-call logistics and respectful goodbye, so that at the end of a meeting, everybody knows that it ended cleanly, that the time for the next meeting is set, if that's relevant, and what everybody has to do moving forward. That will leave a good taste in everyone's mouth and improve team performance. A weekly sign-off ritual could be something like a short Friday assessment meeting, where people evaluate collectively how the tasks were performed during the coming week. A yearly sign-off ritual might be an end-of-year evaluation or end of employment, or at least service to the team. These sign-off rituals, again at the slowest timescale, can be momentous and incredibly important for feedback and correction of your teams. The last kind of ritual we'll discuss are the check-in rituals. Check-in rituals at the daily timescale might include having a digital water cooler, which we'll discuss later. as well as having a beginning of call check-in just to make sure that everybody knows how everybody else is doing, alluded to in the previous slides. A weekly check-in ritual could be a social hour to talk with coworkers in a context that's not a meeting. This will allow your meetings to become more professional and your social experiences to become more authentic. We'll talk about this in the culture section. A yearly check-in ritual might be something like a manager-employee meeting or self-assessments. These, like the sign-off rituals, are also valuable improvement opportunities for your team. Let's summarize what we learned in this section. We talked about tools. We talked about low-tech hardware, high-tech hardware, and software. We talked about mindset as a tool to help remote teams be efficient and healthy. We talked about roles in remote teams, how they contain new types and new combinations of tasks. We talked about rituals in remote teams, such as sign-on, sign-off, and check-in. Next lecture on totems, we'll discuss what guides the interactions of roles. They're called totems. Thanks for listening,